So, you guys just want to start with our jigsaw responses?
Sure.
Yeah.
Do we want to go in order or different
That
orders?
works. Order works.
Alright, so that first one. So I had the Leaving Poverty Behind article, and it talked basically about how power relations were portrayed in different texts. So like how age, race, class, gender, any number of like ways in which power could be what was the term? Wielded is what she did.
I just realized we had the same question, I think.
Do we?
Yeah.
You guys A and D?
Yeah.
Okay, you guys have the same exact.
Which letter are you again?
C.
Okay, I'll look at B, because I read that chapter. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Gosh, I was like, wait
Is
a
it-
minute, this sounds really
Oh, and then our
familiar.
share part different.
It's
Exactly.
exact same question. That's funny. Yeah.
Oh,
Okay,
we
so
can both talk about what we.
I'm doing B now.
Talk about whatever.
Hey.
Oh, we can do whatever.
Science fiction. I like science fiction. Okay, so keep going. I'm sorry.
Anyway, so and it asked me to think how I saw power being wielded in the book we read, and I read City of Thieves, which I think we all did, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I just talked about like the foreigners who like were coming into the Amazon, and how like the professors, archaeologists, Lud, I don't know how to say his name. That guy, and then
Yeah.
the doctor, and then the captain guy were like seeing themselves as superior just because they were like,
We're from
They
the
had what-
this land.
yeah,
Yeah.
There's so much of that, like that theme of machismo, you know, like as it was describing in the article and stuff. It's kind of chuckling at that.
yeah, they were like kind of forcing their ways of life because they feel like their way is better than the way of the native peoples, and they were kind of referring to the native peoples as savage and just
Oh, yeah.
Super stereotypical.
Yeah,
that's
like
kinda
trying to, like,
upset.
Give them
like
all.
not everyone, but just those three characters in particular I noticed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, maybe not the doctor as much, but she was kind of
Evil
just in the
time.
end, yeah.
Yeah. Evil day.
And then what else did I write? And just like how when they were going in there, they like ended up altering the lives of these people by like bringing in these like material goods that they didn't really see any use for, but like forcing it upon them, which like ended up turning around how they lived, what they valued, and kind of they lost their culture that way.
Mm-hmm.
And then other than that, there was like kind of an age
Yeah,
power
there
I
was.
noticed, especially with Alexander and Nadia.
Mm.
Like they were all just seen as children that can't really do anything, and like in the
they
beginning.
went on those adventures.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like I feel like also there's like I was kind of noticing the age and the family kind of power, where like at the beginning, like Alex didn't really have a choice where he went. Like he was just sent to his grandma in New York where he didn't really want to go.
Mm-hmm.
Like I thought that was like it's like a normal thing for a kid not to really have any say in where he goes, but I was just kind of like noticing that little bit of power difference. Like he wanted to go with his sisters, but he didn't really have any choice, and ended up going on this crazy adventure.
And then there's a lot about gender, like
Mm.
males being dominant, like women can't be leaders, but like in the story, I feel like when I think her name was Iomi that became chief of
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
People
That was
of the
cool.
Mist, like and we kind of start to see, okay, these things aren't really the way things are.
Yeah. And like Kate had a pretty big voice.
Mm-hmm.
It made me really upset that they didn't, at the end of the book, they didn't talk about what happened with Alexander's mom.
I was so
Yeah.
mad. I like closed the book and I was like, "You're kidding!"
So he
Yeah.
just like traveled and like risked his life, and I was so upset. I was like, wait, is she alive? And like, I was so mad. Like my roommates were like, Connie, what's going on? Like, they didn't finish. I was so mad.
Well, you know, there's more
Oh.
books in the series.
Is there?
Yeah, there's 2 more books.
Oh, they probably.
I hope that they tell, because that would just be.
Do you have them?
I have the no.
Are you?
There's like
Oh.
I
Oh,
don't
at the
read
back of
it.
the book.
At the back, there's like their adventures continue. In
That makes sense because I was so mad.
But I don't think this is right off the beginning. I think it's some random chapter because it didn't make any
Yeah,
sense.
that'd be annoying, like leaving out such a huge plot
Yeah.
element, you know?
Because that's like kind of the family part that I really liked. that, like getting into that, and then when it kind of got into Amazon, I was like, okay, a little less relatable. Okay, are you?
It asked to share either the poetry or what was the other one? Realistic fiction text. I really like the poetry part, and it talked about like all these different kinds of books. Like there was one called Gathering the Sun, and it was written originally in Spanish, but it was translated to English.
That's cool.
So like, and it talked about how these kinds of texts and how poetry can help students who are second language learners and learning English as a second language, and how, like, I don't know, because they talked about, one of the books was this guy who was talking about his struggles when he was learning English, and how like his teacher had supported him through poetry and music.
That's pretty cool.
And how like that helped him to learn English easier because it's kind of less intimidating to students.
And you remember things like that more than actually vocab.
Mm-hmm. And it kind of makes it more meaningful too to the student. But there were a lot of books I liked. That's just a couple, but yeah. I just found it interesting, and it talked about how a child's identity is strongly bound to their language.
Oh, it really is, yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm like doing a whole project on that for another class.
I'm sure there's a lot more I could have shared out of that section, but
Hey, you shared a good deal, yeah. So
that's what stood out to me.
okay, so on B, I'm gonna try my best because I'm just reading this now. But yeah, like I really enjoyed this chapter because I was like, fantasy, sci-fi, yes! My little inner nerd coming out. But it was kind of funny, this little side note, and I was reading about, in the science fiction section, about like the dystopian thing. I was like, oh yeah, hey, you know what, that's Hunger Games right there. And then it was like, in blah blah blah, it's Hunger Games. I was like, nailed it. But let's see, so how does science fiction fit into its own category? Well, I think science fiction kind of fits into its own category because it has like that fictional element and like kind of like it's borderline realistic fantasy, but it has a lot more to do with like this could happen if like because science is supporting it, and like it's kind of like describing. Oh, sorry, I kind of like lost my train of thought there, but like the potential of science and like kind of using these things that we know and are real in our lives, like they were talking about like the use of cloning or something like that, and how these are things that are scientifically possible as far as we know, and then kind of just like expanding on that and saying, okay, what if? So it's like taking what we know and what's real and then like expanding on it exponent like a whole lot more, and kind of like, yeah, it's like very based in scientific possibilities. I think that's kind of the thing. So it's kind of different from fantasy and other fictions just because I think we have an idea that it could actually happen. Like when it's talking about the dystopian society, like with the Hunger Games, like we could very well fall into a dystopian future where there's one major party ruling and kind of forcing us to fight to the death to keep control or something like that. And then like it's kind of funny actually, I was kind of thinking of some other science fiction that I've read or watched, and just kind of thinking, okay, could that actually happen? I've like watched whole shows on could this actually happen. So like
sorry, I didn't want to say it.
But like yeah, like in the show, like I've watched like whole specials on Doctor Who. Could this actually happen? Could they do it? And like there's some actual like things that they're saying, well, it's possible that people could start losing their humanity, blah, blah. I could ramble all day. But, so then the thing about the truth and fantasy, what they were talking about was kind of like how there are themes, like there's a lot of themes and morals from what we know to date. It's kind of like, I kind of thought along the lines of like fables and fairy tales, kind of like how they have their lesson at the end. So, like, for example, in Harry Potter, you know, that definitely, I was like, okay, I was reading through. I was like, oh my gosh, okay, come on, you gotta mention Harry. Come on, oh, there you go. So that's why I enjoyed this chapter. I was like, oh, Narnia, oh, Harry Potter. But yeah, like with Harry Potter, there's like the themes of like there's growing up and there's like loyalty and finding a place where you belong, kind of like those themes. And like as it was going through, like with all the different themes of fantasy, like those are like all the kind of common things that you see in a lot of fantasy stories that we can relate to. So yeah, so there's a lot. Like I think it's because like the truth comes from being able to relate to the characters and find the meanings in the stories that we can relate to, and because they're kind of like what was it saying? It was like the kind of like based off of truth. Come right here. Sorry, I'm looking in the book. Oh yeah, hey, there's a whole section truth on fantasy right there. But oh yeah, I was talking about the metaphors and like how like I kind of liked what they're comparing it to, how in like news articles and stuff like they're like they bit the bullet or something like that, or they took one for the team, kind of those kind of metaphor things. But fantasy is a lot like that because yeah, it's so out there and fictional, and yet we can see ourselves in it, and it reflects our society and everything. And because like one thing you can see in Harry Potter with Voldemort, sorry, I said his name. He must not be named. Is like that blind following of a super powerful person. Like we've seen that's a metaphor for our own history of like with dictators and with cults and stuff like that. So you can see that as a metaphor for our own society. Mm-hmm. And then of course there's the going to school thing, and yeah, so there's like a lot of metaphors and seeing ourselves in fantasy that we can see. Mm-hmm. And last question, how does this inform the children's book you read with Allende? Okay, I'm trying to think. Do you have any ideas on this? I've been doing a lot of talking, but I'm just thinking like, well, there's definitely the fantasy part with the beasts. Yeah. Like the big, like, sloth-like things, right?
I mean, I kind of talk about that in mine.
Oh, yeah. If I'm butting into your question.
No, you're not, but it just kind of, like, overlaps a little bit.
Okay, so why don't you talk about that?
Mine was about, like, the 6 basic fantasy motifs, so kind of like how you were talking about, like, the actual parts of fantasy.
Yeah.
So, here comes all 6.
Woohoo!
So, the first one is magic.
Yep.
So if there's anything magical in it, but this is the only motif that appears in books, which I thought was interesting. So they give the example of Charlotte's Web.
I was surprised to see Charlotte's Web in there. I was like, oh, I guess there's the talking, intelligent animals. I guess that does count as fantasy, but I hadn't really thought of that.
Made me think about Animal Farm.
Oh gosh, yeah. I could say that's almost like fantasy and science fiction. Like I don't know if it's because it's possible that kind of society could and did happen, because it's very based off of what really happened. But then there's the fantasy of, like, pigs aren't going to start walking around and taking over.
Yeah. The next one is, like, having a different world, or, like, a secondary world, which I was having a hard time, like, fully understanding, because I understand the example of Harry Potter walking through the solid barrier to platform 9 3/4. Like, I understand that being a different world, but, like, when I tried to relate it to City of Beasts, I was like, well, the Amazon's not really a different world, but he's having, like, different experiences.
Maybe they mean, like, a different reality, almost. Because, like, he comes from the world, like, our world.
Yeah, it could be a different reality.
Yeah, because, like, he comes into this world that is... It's kind of like the one that you're talking about the second world invading our world. I guess, like, invading, it's kind of a funny word for it, but, like, how, like, he comes into this fantasy, like, world of these giant creatures and these, like turning into a jaguar and all this stuff. It's crazy, so this is kind of an idea.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. The next one is, like, good versus evil, which, I mean, that's pretty good. The book said that readers don't have trouble aligning characters on sides of light versus dark. There are typically no characters that are, like, on the fence.
I find that actually changing a lot now. It's something I've noticed, like, they are making a lot of movies and shows and books where they're redeeming the villains. Like, for example, the musical Wicked, where they're redeeming the Wicked Witch of the West. And then, like, gosh darn, like, I just had this example in my mind. Oh, yeah, they're making the Maleficent movie.
Hmm?
Yeah, Disney's making a movie about Maleficent from Sleeping Beauty.
Okay.
And so it's like her backstory. So they're doing a lot of these things where they're explaining from the villain's side of the story. So I find it interesting that they're bringing up this good versus evil when really there's a new trend in like, okay, maybe this villain is a bad guy, but there's some redeeming things about the villain. So there's a lot more villain love coming out.
Yeah.
Like, it started for me with the Avengers and Loki. I was like, oh, he's just misunderstood. It's like, come on, he was I could get into a whole rant about Loki, but
Oh my God.
I was like, I'm a Loki fangirl.
The next one is heroism, and then like within heroism there was 6 different types of heroism. Like an example was like the hero must survive various trails, a new environment, or the hero is is assisted by a protective person. And there's more of those. The next one is special character types, which is like characters who are like part of our imagination.
Yep.
So the example they gave was like the Hobbit, like there are special characters that were made just for the Hobbit. And then the last one is like fantastic objects apparently, which is like magical props.
Yeah.
Like swords and mirrors and cauldrons and Harry
Wands.
Potter and his wand and his broom.
Right. And then, of course, there's the ring. I just automatically thought of the ring,
Yeah.
the ultimate magical object that kind of messed up our whole entire world.
I was supposed to, for my next question, I was supposed to take those motifs and apply them to the 2 children's books that I had to YouTube or watch. The first one was Stranger in the Mirror. It was a YouTube on our little fantasy.
Oh, right.
It was a really interesting book, and I